Hey, today we're doing a deck profile on my historic Esper control deck for Magic Arena. So this deck is pretty straightforward to play. What we're looking to do here is to get to the late game and drop our big Planeswalker and token generators to overwhelm our opponent and take control of the game and push for damage for victory. Pretty simple gameplay, and I'm gonna go ahead and go over some of my card choices and some of the reasons behind that. So first off, we'll start off with the companion over here. We have Kahira, which is a uh, cat beast companion that really doesn't do anything else in this deck. Its main purpose is to give you an extra card to draw and play. Since we don't play any creatures, it's basically free, so why not? And he or she, I guess, happens to also work really well with Ashiot. Ashiot here happens to make a 2/3 Nightmare token, which the companion buffs up and gives it Vigilance, which in the late game is pretty good. Vigilant 2/3 or 4/3 tokens are pretty good. Overwhelms your opponent, and yeah. So four Fatal Pushes, named because Historic is a pretty fast format with a lot of mono green aggro, is it aggro, and small, mono black decks here and there. And we really need to get rid of those small minions that will snowball you if you don't. Especially like Pelt Collector, for example, they can get really big and out of control. And if you can't get to the late game, there's really no point in trying. Thought Seizes, great for control matchup, great for just hand disruption, punishes our opponents for greedy keeps, and things like that. Overall, pretty good card. There are times in the game where you really aren't going to cast this card. The 2 damage really does hurt. It's really personal choice for me here because I do like the versatility of Thoughtseize over Inquisition, which I do play Inquisition just in the side deck over here. Memory Lapse, really good card. It helps us get to the late game. Really, it stuns our opponent. It denies them card draw. It forces them to sort of reinvest mana into the card they draw. The only real issues you find with Memory Lapse is there's cards that you need to negate, but well, obviously you can't because you're putting it back on top of their deck and you're just redrawing it, recasting it, and that can blow you out if you don't have an answer to cards that you do force your opponent to top deck, especially in the late game. Search for Scanta, really good card. Access is kind of like another land and kind of a filter. We're just looking to dump cards that we don't need, access land, things like that. Combos well with Teferi. Searches our deck. You play Teferi, you untap, search, search. Really good synergy there. Drown and Lock. Not too great this format since our opponent's not really playing too many fetch lands, things like that. But still really good counter card and removal, and just an overall generally good card. So here are the 3 mana lineup. Narset's pretty good. There's a lot of draw cards in this format. Fateless Looting, really popular card. Kind of doesn't really stop. What's that new card? Shoot, kind of forgetting. But the Is It card that you search the top 3 of your deck and add a card to your hand and exile a card. Can't think of it right now, but yeah, that's the only card that this card is not too great against. But pretty much every card in this format, there's a lot of draw cards and things like that. So Archmage Charm, another very good card. Albeit a little bit hard to cast. It is 3 blue mana. Our mana base here is we've got a lot of blue sources, but quite frankly, some of it's a little slow. Some of our lands do come in tap, and so just be a little bit careful when you're trying to keep a hand with Archmage Charm. If your hand's kind of a mix between 3 colors, you may want to mulligan, but Archmage Charm is great. You namely want to keep it to draw 2 cards. You rarely ever want to counter a card with Archmage Charm. Archmage Charm is there to draw us our decks for answers, draw into our lands, things like that. Things that Narset can't do. Granted, Narset is easier to cast since she's just 2 blue. But she doesn't fetch us lands, and getting land um, starve is going to be really punishing in this deck, especially since we're playing so many high mana cards. But overall, Archmage Charm is great. I debated on playing 4, but I think 3 is a good number. Here we have a couple of sweepers, Day of Judgment and Extinction Event. Day of Judgment, the more I play, 2 white mana sometimes is difficult to get by. Same thing with Wrath of God. They're kind of the same card, to be honest. Wrath of God doesn't let your opponent's creatures regenerate, but in this format, I don't think any creatures do regenerate, so kind of a moot point. So yeah, Day of Judgment, great card. Good sweeper. Just the double white sometimes is hard to come by. There are quite a few cards in this format that do have indestructible, and so this is not going to answer everything. So that's what Baleful Mastery and Extinction Events are for. Um, so you have like what was it? Sometimes you'll run across Ugamogs, or not Ugamogs? Yeah, Ugamogs. 10/10 with indestructible, nearly impossible to kill. Um, Not so much in best of 3 formats, especially special as best of 1. You'll have those Tibalt Trickery decks that really try to pump out Ulamog on turn 2 or turn 3, and you just need an answer. And this kind of helps you answer that card, but not all the time. It combos well with Narset. If you have Narset out and this, it's 2 mana exile a Planeswalker or creature card, really strong. Extinction Events for those decks that have a lot of anti or indestructible stuff, like Angel decks, the Weaning Whites, and stuff that you just don't want recurring your opponent's graveyard, hits lowers decks, things like that. So between these 2 cards, you can up them or lower them depending on your own personal preference. But yeah, this seems to be working for me okay. You don't want too many sweepers because they're not too great against other control decks, obviously, and they can kind of get a little cloggy in your hand sometimes. The idea here is the reason I want to play 3 sweepers is Narset and the Archmage Charms are supposed to draw you into them, and so hopefully you'll see your sweepers sooner than later. Here we have our Planeswalkers that are basically our finisher and closer for the game. Teferi is essentially a 3 mana Planeswalker with works well with your Memory Labs, Drown and Lock, Fatals, even Baleful if you need to cast Baleful for 2. Yeah, overall great Planeswalker. You don't really get to alter him too much. There are times where I have, and obviously that closes out the game, but most of the time he sticks on the board, and your opponent has to either deal with it, or you're just going to be drawing a bunch of cards and overwhelm your opponent. Ashiot here, token generator, acts as a bit of your defense to your health and blockers, things like that. The -3 sometimes occasionally comes up. You want to hit tokens because you hit a token, you exile their token, and you hit a card in their hands. That's great. Worst comes to worst, you hit like some permanents, like some enchantments, things like that you otherwise don't really have too much interaction with. Hit those, force them to reinvest their mana again, or if they have nothing else in their hand, they're just gonna have to exile it. So overall, great card. If they leave it for 2 or 3 turns on the board, you can ult with it and get some advantage that way. Shark Typhoon, great card to kind of dig through your deck. I come from playing Yu-Gi-Oh, and cantrips are always great, and stands through in Magic, and a cantrip that makes an uncountable creature is great. It acts as your blocker, acts as an answer and threat next turn when your opponents, if they play a Planewalker, if they play Narset or something, you could just shark it, get a flying shark and smack the Narset and kill whatever you need to kill, or block whatever you need to block. Here I'm going to go over a little bit of the mana base and kind of explain some of my choices here. Castle Ardenvale, just one of it I think is good enough. You're not always going to see it, but I felt that testing with 2, you sometimes draw two in your opening hands, and you just don't want to see it. Double white really doesn't do much for this deck other than for your Day of Judgment. So one of it is you'll either see it in the game or you don't. But that's fine. If you don't see it, then you hopefully see your searches, and then that hopefully you have Teferi on board to combo off. Otherwise, you can just if you have open mana, you just keep generating tokens with this thing, and it does eventually overwhelm your opponent in the late game. Early game is where you just don't want to see it. Late game is where it comes in really handy. So here we have the Fable passages and the five um, basics. So this is a bit of a personal choice. And colors in this deck are hard to come by since you have triple blue, double white, and so reason why I play this is occasionally you'll run across some wastelands, you'll run across someone playing Assassin's Trophy, and you just need essentially kind of free ramp for you. You don't want to be without a basic, but at the same time you don't want to be playing too many basics because then you're not gonna have those colors that you need. The Fables honestly act as sort of a tri-land. Fetch you one of the three colors here. Only problem with Fable is you open up with too many of them and you're kind of just clogged on your mana sources, and you're really slow on there. The good thing about Fable is that you thin out your deck, especially during the late game. You want to flood out, so you just thin out your deck, search, get rid of these basics, thin them out. Works well with the fatal pushes. It triggers your revolt. Push things for 4 CMC. That's great. Also helps to speed up your search for Sconsta. Sometimes you just need this thing to go off and become a land as soon as possible, especially against really aggro deck. You don't want to sit there and always keep this as an enchantment. You want to get there, get your your blue mana sometimes real quickly. Um, and for the rest of the choices, playing a total of 10 shocks, I believe. Shock lands are quite painful. There's really no way to recover life in this deck. Um, and so if you're playing against something aggro, shocking yourself, you're just asking for it. You're just gonna die quick to their burn spells, their little weenie whites and weenie green creatures. So I think 10 shocks is a good place to be. And a couple of check lands. Yeah, honestly, you don't want too many check lands either because they do conflict with Fables. Because you're gonna be really slow if you draw too many Fables and too many checks. And you're just gonna be playing tap land after tap land, and that's just really slow. And so here I try to find a good balance between the two, and this is just my mana base here. Side cards, obviously you got your companion here. Inquisitions, great if you're playing against low mana curve decks, combo decks, other control decks. You want to hit their counter spells, pick apart their hands, things like that. Here you got Gravdigger's Cage. We're not really casting anything from our graveyard, reviving anything back, and so Gravdiggers is a pretty good answer to a lot of decks that are just bringing stuff back from the grave. Cat decks, for example, are really popular in this format and arguably one of the strongest decks. Cat's just really hard to interact with, especially with Witch's Oven. So you play this, pray they're not playing some sort of Kolaghan's Command or the enchantment to any sort of artifact removal. You're pretty good. Once you slap this card down, they just have to play around it or don't play at all. Dovin's Veto for the control matchup. Honestly, you don't really need too many. You really have enough counter spells, I believe, with this lineup, and so Dovin Veto is just for those times you just need to counter something and end it there. So not much else to say about that. Here's kind of where I'm a little conflicted. I'm not too sure if I want to play 2 Aether Gus or I want to play 2 Cryocraniarium. I find both to be really good cards, just not really enough room in my side deck to play 2 copies of each. Probably Aether would probably be a more versatile card, plus its instant speed and lower mana will help you get to your late games more so than Cry, but at the same time, Cries really do hurt those weenie white decks that have indestructible creatures, which you will run into a lot. And Wrath of God and Day of Judgment aren't going to answer that. So you do need a bit of cards that minus counters and bypass that um, indestructibility. Here you have Kaya. I really like Kaya. She is MVP in a lot of my matchups actually, especially in cat decks. You slap this down turn 3, you can start exiling cat, you can exile gooses, exile witch's oven. Against really aggro decks, you can hit their creatures, start healing up, and generally they avoid hitting Kaya because they're trying to hit your life. But overall, Kaya can be a lifesaver, and you rarely get to ult with her, but you do start hitting stuff in their graveyard, especially against graveyard dependent decks. She's just really good. So I think 2 copies of her on the side is the way to go. Um, having seeing her three would be too many. You don't want to. It's either you kind of choose between your 3 mana lineup here, and same with Cry, and kind of have to balance between the two, or between all these 3 mana cards. Kenzing Lova and Heliod kind of serve the same purpose. They're essentially here to hit artifacts and enchantments. Cleansing is more versatile, probably more useful than um, Intervention over here. The only reason I play Intervention is for against really big burn decks. You do sometimes want to heal up. This is your only way to really recover life, and if you just need a little bit of that extra life to just push for the rest of the game and control the rest of the game, then that's what Heliod's for. And also, sometimes you prefer this over Cleansing, because if you have a Shark Typhoon on the board or maybe a Search, you don't want to blow up your own stuff. Um, Heliod lets you pick and choose your enchantments and artifacts that you want to nuke. On top of also being an instant, that's also very handy. But one of each, since they're also double white. So, like I mentioned before, double white's a bit tough to come by, and so you don't want to be playing too many of these. So yeah, so that's the overall overview of my deck. It's got to me pretty much. I'm hanging around platinum right now. I don't really play too much to get myself over to diamond, but reach high platinum's fairly easy with this deck. This deck is namely designed for best of 3. You can play it in best of 1, but best of 1 you're gonna be seeing a lot of aggro decks and a lot of kind of one-trick pony decks. So that's where this deck has difficult dealing with super duper heavy aggro decks. If you're gonna be playing this in the best of 1, you'll probably want to up your sweepers, maybe up some more removal, maybe drown locks, things like that. And if you're playing against one-trick pony decks like decks where they're dumping cards in the graveyard, reviving it with fateless looting, and I forgot what the black revival card, but the one with the flashback. You know what I'm talking about if you played against that deck. You may want to be playing something like Clean the Dust, to help deal with graveyard removal and control. Another card I used to play is Memory Commit. It's a kind of an interesting card. It's great. I've won games with it where you just play it with Narset on the board and you just clean out your opponent's graveyard and hand, and it feels really dirty. Only problem with it is technically a 10 mana investment, and it's getting to really late game, and if you don't have Narset, you're never going to be casting the other side of commit. And so I decided to take it out and play more of a sort of a Super Friends deck here versus a sack out deck. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed my deck profile. Just let me know if there's anything I should try out or change, and I'll give that a shot. I'll probably post a couple of gameplays of my deck in the near future here. But yeah, see you guys in a bit. Lates.